Hello there, welcome to Inkquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Inkquiring Minds Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today on the slab we have a pen and pencil set from 1939. It's a Parker Vacumatic pen and pencil set, but what's unique about this particular Vacumatic is it is in the vertical stacked celluloid called shadow wave rather than the horizontal stripes that you're used to with the typical Vacumatic celluloid. These striations run vertically through the pen, and it's a beautiful matching set. The other interesting thing about this particular Vacumatic is that it is a Speedline filler. This was the second generation of the Parker Vacumatic assembly. The first generation had this aluminum shaft turn and lock, and hence it was called the lockdown filler. And it had a much shorter blind cap because that pump retracted like that and locked into place. Well, they decided, I think, that that was a little bit too difficult to manufacture and maybe they were having problems with them. They redesigned it so that it doesn't lock into place anymore. It just pumps back out again to its full length, and they increased the length of the cap. So the first generation was the lockdown. The second generation they called the Speedline filler. And then the third generation was when the war happened and they needed all of their brass and aluminum for the war effort. They changed it to a plastic pump. Now, this is the third generation Parker Vacumatic, but I put a modern Vacumatic pump in here that is completely brass. Let's take a look at this 1939 Parker Vacumatic and triage it to see what it needs to be resurrected. You see those beautiful brown vertical striations in the cap. It is a split arrow Parker clip, but with no blue diamond on it, and two gold cap bands. The top finial, the clip, and the cap bands are in relatively good shape, and that shadow wave stacked acrylic celluloid looks really, really nice. It reminds me of this. This is a 1943 Schaefer Balance Touchdown, and you can see it has the same kind of vertical stacked celluloid. Two beautiful pens from a similar era. The interesting thing about this particular Parker Vacumatic is that the blind cap on it is black, not the vertical striated stacked celluloid. So I think this is a replacement. It's got a nice end jewel on it, but it should be in the same material. So that blind cap has been lost through the years and has been replaced with this black one. Unscrew the pen. Here's the section. Looks like it's in okay shape. It's got a little bit of a gouge right there. I'll have to sand out. It's not screwed all the way in. I can't move it either direction, but that just means it's full of old ink. And let's take a look at this nib. It's a Parker Aero nib. It says Parker USA on it, and the feed looks to be okay. And we look more carefully at that nib. It looks to be a fine, but there are no bends, no chips, no cracks. And let's look at the barrel here for a moment, and we'll see GOS Parker, Parker Vacumatic. The imprint is very deep, nice, made in the USA. And we have a 9 with no dots around it. That's the fourth quarter of 1939. So just before they stopped making this Speedline filler. And the Speedline is very bouncy. And if I put a light behind it, you can see that there's some dark mass there, light, dark mass, light. There's that pump moving in and out. But that dark mass is the remnants of the diaphragm that has become detached on the inside. So this pen does not work in its current configuration. So we'll have to get that Vacumatic pump out of there. And the pencil seems to be in really good shape. Lots of wear on both of these. After all, these writing instruments are 86 years old. Same Parker split arrow clip, good top finial, and it actually has a lead in it, I think. Yep, there's the lead. And you give it a turn and it retracts and expels the lead. You pull the top off and there is the lead refill unit and eraser in original condition. Pull that out. There we go. And there is the Parker lead cartridge replacement unit, made in the USA. When empty, throw away and replace with full. There's no leads in there at the moment. And you can get these replacements at pen tooling currently, but I think I'll just put a regular lead in this one and keep this original. And here it says, use Parker refill lead cartridge, I suppose, or you'll void your warranty. There you go. So the pencil's a good shape, just needs some cleaning. The fountain pen, however, needs some work. So the first thing we do is put this in the ultrasonic bath of pen flush, which is 90% distilled water and 10% ammonia. And then we'll come back after it's been cleaned a bit. Now, while the Shadow Wave fountain pen sits in the pen flush ultrasonic bath, I'm going to read to you some research I've done on Tony Frischier's wonderful parkerpens.net website that has everything you need to know about Parker pens. And this is in the section on the Parker Vacumatic, talking about the Shadow Wave. The reorganization of the bottom line took place in 1938. All marble colors were discontinued and replaced by a new design referred to as the Shadow Wave. It was a pattern of wavy, broken longitudinal lines set on a black transparent background. The black reticular and the golden web were discontinued, although the feature with the black blind caps survived into the Shadow Wave line. The bottom line was still not streamlined. That tells me that the Parker Vacumatic I'm holding in my hands here doesn't have a replacement cap on it. This is what those pens looked like starting in 1938. They were the bottom line Vacumatic that had no blue diamond on the clip and two thin cap bands. So this is an original condition. I had assumed that the blind cap was a replacement because it's solid black, but that's how they made them. And here is the Shadow Wave fresh out of the bath. Dry it off a bit, and there we go. So now that it's been in the bath for a bit, let's see whether we can get that section to unscrew. Got a bit of rubber mat material, and there it's opening up. So it's just ink. Usually these sections don't need any heat to get them off unless someone has glued it shut. These are not designed to be glued shut. And there is the nib unit and the breather tube. Let's see whether we can get that breather tube out. There we go. Small tube of celluloid. That's amber in color. And now we can knock that feed out of that section. And I use this knockout block that Scott Pauley of the Inky Nib made me. It's a 3D printed knockout block in hard carbon fiber, and it works very nicely. It's very small and light. Use these knockout rods that I got in my first knockout block that I got from Bill's block. This is from the Pen Dragons and has various size knockout rods for the various size feeds. So we find the right size. There we go. And we tap it out. And there's the ebonite feed. It will take some polish and polish it up right there at the visible part. And run some compressed air through that breather hole. Make sure all of the old ink is out of there. And here is our nib. I loop on it to see the imprint. You might be able to see right at the bottom there, .8, which means the second quarter of 1938. So the nib is from the second quarter of 1938, and the barrel is from the fourth quarter of 1939. So all of these will go back in the ultrasonic bath for a bit, and then I'll start polishing up that nib. And while I've got the nib in the pen flush again, let's see if we can get this Vacumatic pump out of here, this Speedline filler. Speedline filler has a rod of aluminum, a spring inside that aluminum tube, and a brass cap. Put the collet from the Parker Vacumatic vac extractor from the Inky Nib, tighten it down, get out some gripper material, and give it a turn. There we go. And it's stripping again. Okay, so the last one did this too. Hope this one isn't glued in too. Really tight. Yep, it's stripping on there. Might have to add some heat. Welcome to day 2 of Get the Goddamn Pump Out. Oh my God. 2 days of fighting with this Speedline filler pump. I finally got it off just now. It's Monday afternoon. I started trying getting this out Sunday morning, something like that. And what did I go through? Well, my hands are raw. I'm bruised from twisting and turning and cajoling. I've soaked it. I have put Pensbury Manor Penetrate Pen Potion number 7 in it and let it sit overnight. I've added some Roncinol lighter fluid to it and let it soak. I have dried it. I have heated it over and over again, and I've put it in my, I have to move my camera for this. I've put it in my heater that I got from Scott Pauley of the Inky Nib, and that heats it to 70 degrees Celsius. I let it sit there for an hour, which is not recommended. And then I kept putting it in the Parker Vac extractor clamp and trying to twist it. And just a couple of minutes ago, it finally decided to give up the ghost. So I have no idea what's on those threads. Doesn't look like any glue, but I'm thinking that someone's glued that in with CA glue and that it finally gave up. Now I have to get the rest of the pump out of there. Still works, but I have to push the rest of the pump out of that. I can put it in my block and push it down with a rod to try to get it the rest of the way out. There we go. I probably broke the pellet, but we'll see. So there's the pellet. So this is a much different kind. Let's get this back out again. So tight. Wow. Now I can't get it out of the collet. So there's the threaded collar, and that goes there. And then there's a spring on the inside of the aluminum tube, capped by a brass cap. And might as well take that out. And then it's got an aluminum receptacle rather than the ebonite that you see in the later pumps. I was just about to drill this sucker out of there and replace it with this one, which has a broken cup on it, but I can replace that. But I was going to make it into a 3rd generation rather than a 2nd generation because I was ready to give up on it. But there is the pellet inside of the aluminum receptacle, and it's coming out. There it is. So I'll just clean that out and make sure that receptacle will accept another pellet, and then we can replace the diaphragm on that Speedline filler and get it working. There's still a bunch of GAC, old leftover diaphragm inside that barrel that I've got to clean out. But finally, after 2 days, success. Okay, now that I finally got that pump out, let's see if we can get the clip off. Usually take a pencil, the eraser part inside the cap, get some gripper material, and just to prevent that clip from damaging the celluloid any further, put a little piece of card in there, give it some pressure, and turn. Now, that came out really nicely. Usually it's the clip that gives me difficulties and takes a couple of days of soaking, but it was the vac pump this time, and the clip has come out nicely. And there's the top jewel that screws into the brass nut that holds the clip in place. Take a look at the clip. It's actually in very nice condition. Very little brassing. I'm going to put these parts in the ultrasonic bath, let them sit for a few minutes, and then we'll go at this clip with some polishing compound and maybe my buffer tool on my Dremel. So far so good. I'll put it on my Dremel buffer. And there we go, after a little bit of polishing on the Dremel with some polishing compound. That's this liquid metal polish, and a little bit of buffing on my jeweler's polishing cloth. It looks brand new. So let's do the same thing with the nib. Put a little polishing compound on it and then put it on the buffer. And there we go, after just a little bit of polish and the jeweler's cloth, it's looking very nice. So there's still some micro abrasions in there. I'm going to put it on the buffing wheel to get it brand new. And now that all that ink is off of there and corrosion, you can see that .8 dot very clearly. And there it is off the buffing wheel. Looking very nice, I must say. So now I'm going to put the nib, feed, and breather tube back into the section and do a dip test on this nib to see what it might need. We'll take the nib and the feed, which I've polished up with some polishing compound. Look nice and shiny, and we'll fit them together just like so. Put some gripper material around them, squeeze it. I always forget to do this first. Put the section back on the barrel. That allows you to get a little bit more grip. And then I just twist it a little bit to find out where the path of least resistance is, because if it sat for 83 years in this position, it's going to be slightly soft right there. There's going to be a little bit of a divot right there, and I feel it right there. So I'll give it a push. And this is one of those sections that has a small rim that actually stops the feed from going any further. So we'll put the breather tube back in there. Give it a small twist, put it back on the barrel, and we'll dip it into a little bit of Waterman's and see how it writes, if at all. So 1939 Parker Vacumatic Shadow Wave. You might be able to hear that. It's very scratchy. So I think I'll check it with my loop again. I thought it was together. It's just slightly misaligned. I'll straighten it up a little bit and put my eyes on for this. So it's not scratchy anymore, but there's a lot of feedback, both vertically and horizontally. This is a fine 14 karat gold nib. And let's see about any flex. Oh yeah, there's a good amount of bounce to this vintage nib. Very nice. So it's going to take a little bit of polishing with some micro mesh to get it writing smoother, but the nib's in excellent shape. Now we need to go ahead, take that pump out again, and put a new diaphragm into it. So I've cleaned out that pellet receptacle, and we'll push a new diaphragm in there, and hopefully that will fit. We get out a standard Vac diaphragm and our inky nib pellet pusher and some talc. A little talc on the pellet pusher to get some talc inside, and then cover the rest of the diaphragm so the latex slides nicely. So now the pellet pusher has that groove right on there that Scott Pauley put on there. Makes it so convenient. You don't have to measure anything. I'll trim that off a little bit first. Here we go. So there, the pellet's right up against the end of the pellet pusher, and I feel around for that groove and make a mark right there, and then trim it off at that point. Perfect. Just gonna put the blind cap on it just to give a little bit more grip and push that pellet in. There we go. Now the process of peeling that diaphragm back on itself. Sometimes this works really well, sometimes it doesn't. So I got it back onto that little shelf right there, and pushing the pump out unkinks any kinks that you might have in your cuff. That seems to be working perfectly. Now we take a little silicone oil just to lubricate the leading edge of the cuff so it won't kink inside the barrel, and we'll put some more lubricant on those threads as well. The only thing that holds that cuff on the end of this pump is the pressure of the barrel on the outside. So the barrel sits right up against there and holds that end of the cuff in place. So we give it a little bit of a twist just to get it moving. You can hear it turning inside there. Let's put some silicone oil on those threads. Then we'll put the collet on, and we'll work it back and forth to make sure it doesn't kink and the diaphragm's not spinning in there when I turn this. Good. Okay. Tighten this down, give it a hand tight turn. Take off the collet. And there we go. You should be able to see it right there. Yep, working nicely. And I polished up the brass cap on the Speedline filler. We'll put the blind cap back on. I'm going to put some masking tape around that gold bit and around these gold bits, and then polish up the cap and the barrel. Okay, we'll go ahead and polish up this barrel and cap. I've masked off the cap bands, and we're going to go through the micro mesh from 1500 to 12,000 grit. I start with the 1500 grit, and if there's any gouges that the 1500 can't take out, I go at those with some 400 grit flexible sandpaper. Let's find out. There's a couple of scratches on the blind cap, marks from the cap on the barrel all the way around, and when we go at the celluloid with 1500 grit, it will show those scratches. So that's pretty good. The 1500 grit got out all of the scratches and gouges, so I didn't need to go any more abrasive than 1500. And I avoided that imprint, of course, and got all the cap striations out, and there are a couple of gouges in the black cap that I got out as well. I didn't mask that off because I couldn't actually get masking tape to stick to that, but as you can see, it's slightly proud, and so when you go over it carefully, it shouldn't touch that gold. Once we get down to around 4,000 grit, 6,000 grit in here, I'll start polishing the gold bits with the micro mesh as well. So we'll go through the rest of the micro mesh and see how this comes up. So here is the Shadow Wave all polished up, cap and barrel. I thought I'd compare it to the pencil and see how dull the pencil is by comparison. And I'm going to do the same treatment to the pencil. The pencil has an imprint on the barrel as well. The same thing, GOS Parker, made in the USA, only this one has a date code of 0 dot, which is the third quarter of 1940. So the nib is from 1938, the Vacumatic pen is from 1939, and the pencil is from 1940. So I've taken the clip off of the pencil as well. We'll do the same cleanup treatment. There's the top finial. I've taken the nose cone of the pencil off. We'll polish that up as well. The leads on the pencil are 1 millimeter. So this will get the same polish treatment, and we'll see the two together. And here's the clip all polished up on the right. You can see the difference from the one on the left. And we've got quite the scratch around the nose of that pencil. So I'm going to have to use some 400 grit to erase that. And there it is, almost gone. So there was a little bit of a divot right there. Maybe you can see it in the barrel where that clip is sat for 86 years. So I'm going to try to line up the polished clip with that old divot. Of course, it's been polished out, but I want to put the clip in the same place. It'll hide that little bit of a defect. We'll put the top finial screw back in. I'm putting another pen inside the cap to give it some pressure to push with my rubber mat and tighten that finial down. Now I'm just going to slide it just ever so slightly to the left, tighten it, and then turn it into that divot. Yep, that's nice and tight now. Now let's put the cap clip of the fountain pen back in as well. There's the nut, and there's the finial, the jewel. That's what they're called, jewels. And so when the jewel is out, it makes it a little bit easier to tighten because you can use the slot. There were two things I didn't want to take apart. One was that end jewel on the blind cap. There was no need to take that off, and these get lost or broken very, very easily. It's in there solidly, it's nicely polished, and so it doesn't need to be removed. And this top jewel was really tight inside that brass nut, so there was no need to remove it either. But let's put the brass nut into the clip. There are no divots on this cap, so I can't tell where the clip was originally, but I'm going to place it between the two breather holes. I'm going to place it just slightly to one side and then tighten it down. And I've got a special slot screwdriver that I've ground down to be narrow enough to tighten these brass nuts. There we go. Not too tight. We don't want to split the plastic on the inside. Then we can put that jewel back down inside the nut and tighten that down. Turn it slightly to the right. It should be right between those two breather holes. And there are two pieces all polished up, looking like brand new. Now all we have to do is put the nib and feed back in the section and fill the pen. And put that lead back in the pencil as well. The nib and feed back together again. Put the breather tube, find that sweet spot, there it is, and give it a push. And there we go, it's in the right place, looks lined up. Check with the lute to make sure I haven't changed the adjustment of the nib tines. It looks pretty good. And put a little drop of silicone oil on those threads, work it around. Now we're going to measure the pen with the blind cap. 10.27. Press tear, remove the blind cap, and fill it with some Waterman's Serenity. Immerse the section, give it a push, and I hear bubbles. And I just give it a few even pushes until I hear no more bubbles. And that generally means that the pen is full. Yep, no more bubbles. Put it back on the scale. And we have 1.35 milliliters of ink, which is really good. Very nice. Now all I need to do is to tune that nib up so that it writes nice and smooth. Okay, now let's see if we can tune this nib. I'll use my USB microscope to show you what the tines looked like when I felt it was scratchy. And I adjusted the tines slightly, and they got better, and then they got better. And here is what they look like right now. And I think they're pretty well aligned. Now I'm getting substantial feedback, but there's no scratch anymore in any direction. So now that the tines are aligned, I can polish out that feedback. And there's quite a bit of it, so I'm going to start with some 6,000 grit, and then I'll move up to 8,000 and then 12,000. Just gonna put a drop of water on there for lubricant. Of course, the ink is a nice lubricant as well. I'm just gonna go up and down about 8 times. Side to side, points of the compass. Now this 6,000 grit is fairly gritty, figure 8s, so I'm going very carefully. And I'll just do the back side just a bit. Then we'll move up to 8,000 grit. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Points of the compass, 7, 8. Counterclockwise, clockwise, figure 8s, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8. And a little bit on the back side. And getting there. I think the 12,000 is going to be the key here. Yeah, that's getting there. I think I'm going to polish it a little bit more with the 12,000 grit. Okay, there's still quite a bit of an edge on that. So I'm going to work on it a little bit more and see whether I can improve it. So I finally adjusted it to the point where it's writing with a feather touch. Now, I'm hardly putting any pressure on this nib at all. And it is writing. And it's writing a very fine line, extra fine, and it's very juicy and has a good amount of bounce to it. So there is some feedback because it's so ultra fine, but it's not scratchy. You can probably hear that feedback, but it's a very, very interesting writer. It took me a little bit of adjustment with my nib pliers to get that nib absolutely aligned properly. Then I smoothed it out from there. It's quite the juicy writer now. So there we go. The pen gave me quite a few curves, and I'll talk about my thoughts about this resurrection of the pen and pencil set in just a moment. So what are my thoughts about this resurrection? What I've learned from restoring this fountain pen is not to think anything is going to be easy. This one looked like it was in perfect shape. All it needed was to be polished up and a new diaphragm installed, and it would be lovely. But the moment you think of something like that, stuff happens. So this one was a bit of a challenge in that I thought it was going to be like the debutante I restored last week, where the pump filler mechanism was actually glued in. Thought I might have to drill it out. But after a couple of days of fighting with it and having wrecked hands because of it, my hands are still really sore from trying to get that pump out. It finally gave up the ghost. I still can't figure out whether it was actually glued in. I can't find any remnants of glue on the threads. I'm thinking it might have been that desiccated diaphragm that was inside that barrel that had petrified over the years and solidified itself against the threads at the bottom of the pump. The more I soaked it and heated it and soaked it and heated it, it finally released. I was really afraid that I was going to either break it or I was going to have to drill through the bottom of that Speedline pump filler, which is a shame because the Speedline pump filler itself is in really good shape and works extremely well. And they are a bit of history. They were only made for a couple of years before they were replaced by the celluloid rod because the United States had to reduce their usage in aluminum and brass for the war effort. So this pump can be replaced with a third generation, but it would be a shame to do so. I also learned that these shadow wave pens, they were only made for a couple of years, but I learned that the black cap was a standard feature. I've now seen shadow wave in green and in blue and in some gray as well, and they all have this solid black blind cap on them. So I think it's an interesting design choice. Maybe it was a manufacturing choice. Perhaps milling this celluloid in this vertical pattern was a bit expensive, and milling a blind cap like this might have been problematic. I don't know. Perhaps some of you Parker aficionados out there might know why they were black and not in the full celluloid color. It doesn't matter. It's a lovely, lovely pen that is translucent so you can see your ink levels. The hardware came up gleaming on both the pencil and on the fountain pen. And some people do prefer the vertical shadow wave celluloid to the horizontally stacked celluloid that you typically see in these Parker Vacumatics. So in the end, I'm really pleased that both of these writing instruments came up looking so beautiful and are so very functional as well. The nib on the fountain pen is very fine indeed, and I would call it a feather touch, if that isn't too sacrilegious, because feather touch was a Schaefer trademark. But the pen writes with no pressure whatsoever and is a very, very fine line that has some line variation and bounce to it. This is a standard size Vacumatic, and I know that someone's going to enjoy writing with this pen and pencil set. I'm offering this pen and pencil set for sale for $230 US plus shipping. If you're interested in purchasing it, send me an email at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and your address, and I'll send you a shipping quote. Shipping to North America is about $10 US these days. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section. You'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, as well as instant access to my videos the moment I post them. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you. For watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.